Okay, today's lesson is lesson 4-3, solving inequalities with multiplication and division. When you're solving an inequality using multiplication and division, it really is not difficult. You are essentially doing what we did before when you were solving equations. So just like when we did addition and subtraction equations last week, when you're doing multiplication and division equations, you are essentially doing the same thing. So you're going to multiply or divide each side by that same positive number, and then the inequality will remain true. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but you are going to do what is over here. Multiplication and division are inverse operations, so you are going to do the inverse and balance your equation or your inequality. Now, we're going to talk about negatives and positives later, because it does matter if you're multiplying or dividing by a positive or a negative. It does make a difference. So right now, we're just talking about when you are multiplying or dividing by a positive integer, and that's why it says positive here, okay? So you're going to do the inverse operations, and you're going to balance in your inequality to get your variable loan. But use inverse operations and balance your equation or inequality to get the variable loan. Boy, I wish I had a touch screen. Okay, so when you're doing an inequality, and these first examples are using multiplication to solve. So they go through an example here where you have x over 5 is less than or equal to negative 3. So if I have x over 5 is less than or equal to negative 3, you are dividing here, and the opposite of division is multiplication. So you are going to multiply both sides by 5. Okay? And then you end up here, 5 over 1 times x over 5 is going to give you 1 times x, which is x. Is less than or equal to, and then a negative 3 times 5 is a negative 15. And then, just like before, any inequality that you solve for, you are going to graph it. So right here is a solution, or an example of that solution of the graph. Okay, darkened in circle on negative 15, going to the left, the direction the sign is pointing. Okay, so right now, I think what I would like you to do is pause your computer and you do number 2 and you do number 3. Do number 2 and number 3 for me, please, and then come back. Okay, so number 2 is a negative 0.5 is less than or equal to m over 10. Okay, so we need to get that variable alone. This is division, so we're going to multiply both sides by 10. Over here, you're left with m is greater than or equal to, and then 10 times a negative 0.5 is going to be a negative 5. Now, I want to graph that, but I want to follow the direction of my sign, so I need to rewrite that as m is greater than or equal to a negative 5. And then when I graph it, I have a negative 5. Now 0 is over here. Okay, that's where 0 is. So if this is negative 5, then this is going to be negative 4, and then over here is going to be negative 6. Okay, and m is bigger than or equal to a negative 5. So you're going to put a circle on negative 5, darken it in, and then darken in your graph, your line and your arrow going to the right, following the direction of your sign. Remembering, because I flipped that so that I could follow the direction of my sign. Number 3 then is very similar in that it's negative 3. You're going to also multiply. That's how it's similar. Is greater than 2/3 p. Now, this is a fraction times a variable. So when we multiply, we normally would divide, but we're not going to divide because we have to multiply by the multiplicative, because of the multiplicative inverse property, we have to multiply by the reciprocal of 2/3. So you're going to multiply both sides by 3 over 2. And you're going to multiply this side by 3 over 2. Well, this -3 becomes -3 over 1 because it's a whole number. So 3 times -3 is -9 over 2 is greater than p. But we don't want to end it there because I want my p to be first. So it'd be p is less than, and 2 goes into 9 4 times, and I'm left with 1/2. So it's a -4 1/2. And then graphing that, if this is 4 1/2 negative, my zeros over here, that means this is going to be -4, -4 1/2. This is going to be -5. And then you're going to put an open circle on 4 1/2, and you're going to darken it in to the left. Okay? And that's how they should look. All right. So the next example is using division to solve. So here they divided both sides by 6 to get the variable alone. You have 6 times x. They divided both sides by 6 to get the variable alone. You end up with x being greater than -3, and then they graphed it. Okay, so I want you, this is again nothing new. This is what we did before when we were doing equations. You're just now doing it and changing the sign with an inequality and graphing that inequality, but the process is still exactly the same right now. So I want you to pause your computer, and I would like you to do number 4. Oh, and what other number? And number 5. 4 and 5. Do 4 and 5 for me and then come back. Okay, so for number 4, you have to, this is 4 times b is greater than or equal to 2, so you have to divide both sides by 4 to get that variable alone. And you end up with b is greater than or equal to 1/2 or 0.5. I'm going to make it 0.5. Okay. So to graph that, if this is 0, that's 0.5, that's 1. Okay, I'm counting by 0.5s. So, or 1/2. So b is bigger than or equal to 0.5, so you're going to put a darkened in circle on 0.5, and you're going to darken it in to the right. Now you are required to have minimally 3 numbers. You can have more, but you have to have at least 3 in your number line. Number 5, you're going to divide both sides by 12. And then you end up with k is less than or equal to a -2. So now you have to graph that. So here's my number line. This is a -2. 0 is over here. So that means it's going to be a -1, and then this is going to be a -3. Okay, darkened in circle because it's greater than or less than or equal to, and then it's going to darken in to the left. Okay, so if you got these problems right, you can move on. If not, you need to go back and rewatch it because we're going to add on to this. Okay, and it's really important that you understand this process first. Okay, so this is the thing. And this is where it gets a little bit challenging for some kids and adults for that matter. You have in the multiplication and division property of inequalities, there is a difference when you divide an inequality by a negative number, okay? When you divide the equality of a negative number, you have to flip or change the direction of your inequality in order to make it true. Okay, and over here it talks a little bit about this, that it says a negative sign in an inequality does not necessarily mean you must reverse the inequality symbol. You only do that when you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number. So this is a big situation, and this is where a lot of people mess it up. So essentially what we're saying is that if I have an equation like -2x is greater than 10, okay? I have to divide both sides by -2. I think you all pretty much understand that to get the variable alone, okay? Now, because I'm dividing by a negative number, you bring down your x, and 10 divided by -2 is -5, but my sign is not going to be greater than, it's going to be less than. You have to flip the sign, okay? That is a big deal. The greater than then becomes a less than because you are dividing by that negative number. Anytime you divide or multiply by a negative number, you have to flip the sign. Now you might say, why is that true? Well, this is why you do it, okay? You change the direction of the sign when multiplying or dividing by a negative, because when you divide or multiply by a negative, you are multiplying or dividing all the values by that negative, which means the opposite of those values. So because it's the opposite of those values, you are also then have to flip your sign to make your statement true, or it will not be true. For example, if I have 2 times a -4 is less than 7 times 9. If you take out that negative sign and then divide, you end up with a -2 times 4 and 7 times 9. If we don't change the direction of the inequality sign, you're going to end up with 8 being smaller than a -63. 8 being smaller than a -63. That's not possible. That's not right. 8 is not smaller than -63. It's bigger than -63. So that's why you have to change the direction of your inequality symbol. Because when you multiply, it's multiplying by the entire, or divide by the entire lot or the entire thing. So when a negative is the same thing as the opposite of. So the opposite of in terms of the sign as well, in order to make it true. And that's how I always remember. Negative means the opposite of. And when it's, because it's not equal, it's not a set value, it's a whole group of values. The opposite of means that sign needs to be the opposite of as well. Okay? So that's why you flip your sign. All right. So in these examples, that's really the big thing, is that you remember to do that, that you remember to flip your sign. So if I have, I think I'm going to jump down and I'm going to do number 7 with you. So if I have, for number 7, if I'm going to put it over here, if I have x over -3 is greater than a -4, okay? To get my variable alone, this is divide. The opposite of divide is multiply. So I'm going to multiply both sides by -3. Again, I think you all, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit that in here, but I'm going to try to squeeze it in there. I think you all understand that. This then becomes x. -4 times -3 is 12. Now, because I multiplied by the negative, I need to flip my sign. So instead of it being greater than, it's going to be less than. And then you have to graph it. So this is 12, this is 13, this is 11. Open circle on 12, darkened in to the left. Okay? Now I want you to pause your video, and I would like you to do number 8. Pause your video and do number 8. Okay, number 8 says you have 0.5 is less than or equal to a -y over 2. Now that negative is not with either the y or the 2, it's with either of them. It's with the whole fraction or the whole ratio. So when you multiply, you're going to multiply by a -2 to get rid of that negative, because I don't want a negative y, I want a positive y. And if I multiply by a -2, it takes away that negative. So I'm going to multiply both sides by a -2. Then over here, I'm left with y. Now, because I multiplied by a negative, I have to flip my sign. So it's going to be like that. And then -2 times 0.5. Where's my book? -2 times 0.5 is a -1. Okay? And so it's -1 is greater than or equal to y. Then you have to graph that. Okay? So if this is my -1, over here's what? My 0. That makes this over here a -2. I'm going to put a closed circle a negative 1. Now, my variable second, I'm going to change that. I'm going to make it y is less than or equal to negative 1, so I know which direction my sign should be pointing, which direction I need to color it in. And that's what it should look like. Okay, if you got that right, you can move on. If not, you need to rewatch that part to understand the flipping of that sign is where I would guess you'd make that mistake. Okay, so this is again the same thing except that you're going to be dealing with negatives and you're going to have to flip signs. So what I would like you to do right now is I would like you to do number 11, and then I would like you to do number 12, and then pause it, do number 11 and 12, and then come back. So number 11 is a negative 5z is less than 35. Okay? Now again, because we are going to divide, and we have to divide by a negative 5, when you multiply or divide by a negative, you need to flip your sign. So this becomes z is not less than, it is greater than a negative 7. And then you would graph that. If this is a negative 7, 0's over here, so this is going to be a negative 6, which means this is a negative 8. And we put an open circle on negative 7, and we darken it in to the right. Okay. Number 12 is a negative 2a is greater than a negative 9. You're going to divide both sides by negative 2 to get the variable alone. That hasn't changed. Your a gets brought down, and then instead of it being a is greater than, it's going to be a is less than, because you have to flip your sign. And the answer, oops, is 4 1/2. Negative 9/2 is 4 1/2. And then you're going to graph that. If this is 4 1/2, then that makes this 5, and that makes this 4. I'm counting by a half. I'm going to open circle and darken in to the left. Okay, so the biggest key to today's lesson, everything is the same as equations. Nothing is different. The biggest difference is, and the only difference really, is that you're going to graph your answers. And instead of an equal sign, there's an inequality sign. And when you're multiplying or dividing by a negative, you have to flip your sign. When multiplying or dividing, maybe I should put that in here so you guys type it in. When multiplying, change the size of this here. Or dividing by a negative, number, you must flip the direction of your sign. I want that written in your notebook. Make sure you write that in your notebook. That is a big deal. Okay, when multiplying or dividing by a negative, you must flip the direction of your sign. Okay, that's really the difference in today's lesson. Everything else is pretty much the same as equations. Okay, so for practice, I would like you to do number 11. I would like you to do number 21. You have to write your inequality from words to an equation, an inequality equation, and then you need to solve it using balanced equations and inverse operations and graph it, because anytime you do an inequality, you should graph it. Then I would also like you, and I didn't put the second page on here, but I would like you to do number 27 as well. So 11, 21, and 27 for tomorrow, okay? Make sure you took good notes, because this is an important lesson. This is where a lot of people mess up, and I don't want you to mess up, okay? Okay.